Hi, my name is Deanna Vallone, and I am with Dakota STEAM Learning. And today I'm going to take you through our art lessons. So I'm not going to take you through an actual art lesson, but I'm going to let you see the procedure we go through with art lessons. Because the biggest thing with Dakota STEAM is we are a STEAM learning company. We're teachers, we're inside public schools, and everything that we do is designed to strengthen students' communication, collaboration, and then most importantly, critical thinking and creativity. So all of ours is linked to those skills. We are not going to be your traditional art teacher. We call it STEAMified art. So it's going to be linked to those other STEAM categories, and it's really going to focus on asking students to strengthen those four key competencies. So when we take students through an art challenge, the first thing we do is kind of review. So they're going to get a new art challenge. We're going to find the STEAM inside of it because all of ours are going to be designed in a way that they're linked to STEAM categories. So they're usually linked to a science concept or they're linked to a mathematical concept. And so you're combining those, which is a key part of STEAM in our opinion. It shouldn't just be an art lesson that's focused on art. That's not STEAM. And while I love art, but we're not who does that. So we want to make sure that when we're doing art, it's STEAMified art because that's what we're good at. So the first thing we always do is we identify the student's art style so that they know what to expect for the day or for the lesson. And then we always start step number one with inspiration. So we let students see an example of the style of art that they're going to be creating. So sometimes it's really simple. And if they're watercoloring, we just show them an example of a watercolor, maybe not even specific to the subject matter that we're focusing on. But it's going to look something like this. For example, I threw in an abstract example just so in case. Just so you can have a visual of kind of what that's going to look like. Sometimes it's professionally made ones, sometimes it's from students who have already done the lesson. After that, we go into either like art history. Sometimes we're linked to a very specific person. So if we're focusing on a specific person and their impact on that art style, we'll talk about that here. So maybe like a biography type, or a lot of times it'll be linked to like a culture. So we have a lot of STEAM classes that link to specific regions or specific indigenous peoples or things like that. And so this is where we would tell them about how the art has been linked to that. So we start with that art history part if it's relevant. And then the students they just kind of reflect upon what they've already learned and they identify what type of art they're going to be making. So all of our projects always come with a STEAM journal that you can either choose to use with students or not. That's what I love about what we do is it's highly customizable to what works for you in your classroom setting. So after that, so we give you a version that already has it documented and a version where they have to write it down themselves. So like kindergarten, maybe you don't want them to do that, whereas fifth graders, you'd want them being held accountable for that step. So, step number two, we go into inquiry because, like I said, we're not a traditional art. We are STEAMified art where we want that critical thinking really integrated into this whole process. So, this is something that you're not going to probably see in a traditional art class. And so, the next thing we have students do is make predictions about how this art is possible. So, they've seen an example of it. And we always activate schema in STEAM every single time. If you've ever done any of our lessons, we find that that's really, really important for students. It's also another way to get built-in communication. So communication is such a big part of STEAM. And if you're doing STEAM, it should definitely be strengthening your students' communication, in our opinion. So this is another natural place where you can have students sharing ideas in small group and using your typical pairing or small group communication protocols so that that is really getting emphasized as well. So we always ask these kind of same questions and just pose questions to students. So have they ever seen this style of art? What's special? Because each style of art is very different. And so it's important for them to be looking for what makes this art style specific. So, like, for example, we do pointillism with students and having them understand and having them try and figure out what's different about pointillism to normal painting because they've usually already painted in their life. And so, those are really critical thinking questions that can be posed in art, and that's what we focus on. We also have them try and identify what type of materials they think the artist used. And sometimes it's really obvious. Like if we're doing crayon resist watercolor, um, the question sometimes isn't if if we're using watercolor, it's the order of events too. What do you think is happening first, second, third? These are great questions for them to start to be grappling with because they're going to make some predictions here in a second. So then we allow the students to reflect upon what they already knew, what they learned with their talking to their partners. Some, like, we always encourage start small group or partners and then move whole class and share out a few things. All those good things you already do as an educator, that's important to do here. And so they go ahead and just take a little bit of time. We always include a box for drawing and writing. STEAM is not a place, it's a place that is always a welcome place to make writing stronger. But because that's not our sole purpose when we're teaching STEAM, we always want to allow students to be comfortable because I'm sure you've noticed that a lot of times students who excel in STEAM don't necessarily excel in reading and writing or even traditional math sometimes. And so we always want to make them comfortable and not feel like this is another place they want to shut down because they really can be your strongest STEAmers. And we want this to be a refuge for them. So after they've documented that, then here's where the critical thinking really comes. We have them diagram, just like we kind of diagram in engineering. We have them try and identify the process that they're going to go through to make this style of artwork. So they're going to make predictions about what they think the artist does to go through and end up with um, this final product. And so a lot of times you'll notice early on in STEAMified art, it'll be like rough draft. They draw it, they paint it. And then you'll notice as the year goes on that they get much more refined in their thinking about these things. And they start to really evaluate different procedures and they critical think to figure it out. And it's amazing to see. So the next thing that we do is this is where we identify the STEAM elements. Like I said, most of our art is never just straight art because that's not our strength. Our strength is STEAMified art. And so we always have ours linked to STEAM in some way. And so these are the most important elements of STEAM when we're doing art. Obviously, you're not going to see a lot of engineering. So we keep that one off. But this is where we identify any of the specific science. So, like, some of ours are very, very linked to science standards. So, if they're studying or like if they're doing something related to sound inside of their painting, for example, because that's like a first grade science standard, and we do art centered around it. This is where we go over sound waves and what they look like, and we experiment with them and things like that. And then we do the art afterwards. So this is where they get that integration of skills. So they're having to take this art idea and integrate science inside. A lot of times with science, it's the materials that you're using and their material properties comes up a lot and how they interact with each other. And that really is critical thinking for them to figure out what's going to happen. And so the next thing, math, technology, we do the same thing. Obviously, a lot of math comes up in ours, a lot with symmetry, a lot with shapes, two-dimensional versus three-dimensional. This is where we'd be using all of that kind of stuff and would be reviewing it with students to help them better understand the subject matter that's going to impact their art. Same thing with technology, same thing with critical thinking. Like, we point out any critical thinking they're going to have to really master to be able to do the artwork, as well as we always like to point out the creativity in art because art is all about creativity. And that's why our lessons are not just super directed. They're challenges still because we want the students to be able to see that even if we're all doing the same art style and we all have the same science inside of it, ours can look slightly different and it can be unique to us because that's such a key part of art. So after that, this is where They go ahead and they document which STEAM elements are involved, and then they revisit diagram time. Like I said, we're all about that critical thinking. So after they know about the STEAM elements, so like an amazing example of this is like watercolor resist. After they understand the relationship between crayons, material properties, and water, then they start to realize, oh, we definitely are going to crayon first and watercolor second. That really, really helps them understand that part. And that's where you can see so much of them evaluating new knowledge and integrating their schema into it, which is such a high level skill for them. After we've done all that critical thinking, that's where we get into the actual art part. So this is where we hit step number 4, which is all about creating. And then we take them through the art process to create a piece of their own in the same style. So we identify the materials for students in case they're still a little flummoxed about what they're using. We do have a detailed material list for teachers, so don't think this is the only material list that exists. You get that on your lesson resources so that you have very detailed things. As opposed to the students, they don't need to know all the nitty gritty. They just want to know exactly what they're using. And then we have them get out their STEAM journal because it's always going to start with some sort of rough draft, right? And usually it's either going to be one big rough draft, which you can see here with the big box, or a lot of times we have students do more than one in that style to see which one they want to pursue. So then after that, we walk them through each step little by little. Like I said, this is not going to be figure drawing. It's going to be draw the head, and this is how you draw a head. That's not what we do. There's amazing art content creators that do that so well, and I love using those types of lessons as well. That's just not us. We're STEAMified. So we take them through all the steps that they need to go through. Sometimes it's 2, sometimes it's 8. And then after that, honestly, a lot of times you might be done. This has already obviously been a pretty lengthy process. So a lot of times you are done. That being said, you can then move on to the finalize. So once they know this process, then like a lot of times what we like to do with students is they go through the whole process with us. They know the process. They have access to watch this again to help them if they need it. And then they go back and sometimes they're with us for more STEAM learning. Sometimes they're back in their classroom with their classroom teacher. That's when they can do a rough draft or a final draft or at home. So that's what we love. If a lot of times, if you have the time, highly recommend allowing them to do a final draft if that's something they're interested in. If not, their first drafts almost always turn out beautifully, almost like final drafts. And then we have some check-ins so that when they're working on the final draft, you can check in with them to see how they're doing. Easy ways to identify who needs help and who doesn't. And then, so like I said, some people just skip that step because they really take that first one and have it be more their final draft, right? But if you're not, no matter what, it's great to finish with this final step. Final draft or not, 2 creations or not, maybe just one. Either way, skipping to step number 6 and having students reflect. Such a higher level thinking skill as well. And we ask students to think about this art style and reflect both on enjoyment and reflect on what they do differently. So that's really, really helpful for students because sometimes we do this step and then they decide based on their answers to this step if they want to do a final draft. Was there something you want to do differently next time, or do you love it? And this is exactly what you imagined. So it's really up to them. And they document that, of course, in their STEAM journal as well. And then the project is over. What I love about Reflections is another place for communication. It's another place where kids are collaborating. And all of that is really, really important to the STEAM process because it's really why we do what we do. I do want to point out we always have tips and tricks for teachers videos inside of our inside of our lesson resources. So when you purchase a lesson from us, it always comes with a video that looks like this. It's tips and tricks specific to that specific lesson. So it's not tips and tricks like this is to the whole process. It's just for that lesson. So this one's for pointillism. I'll just take you through it really quick. We give you a lesson overview just so you kind of know what to expect. We review the material list really quickly. Even though you have a very detailed one, we know how it goes. It's nice to like already have that in your mind before you actually start packing or picking your supplies. We go over common struggles. Everything we sell, we have taught a lot of times. So we go over common struggles. We give you an example of what to expect with students. And these are examples from our classes with students inside public schools. So you know exactly what you can expect inside of that. We give you key elements. I talk over all of them because I know how hard it can be to teach someone else's lesson. And so we have put so much care and attention to every one of our lessons because we're public school teachers too. And we know the struggle and we want you to be successful. And we want every kid to have access to high quality STEAM education. And we love what we do. So we hope that all of this will help you. We include a lot of blank slides. When you're using our stuff, you can either use it off of Canva or off of Google Slides. And you'll see that when we switch them over to Google Slides for you, we always include blank ones because we know how it is. Sometimes you want to make minor changes, and that's a great way to do it. So we hope that all of your lessons with Dakota STEAM go awesome, and they're a great resource for you. See you later.